I promised you already. Now it's time for chapter 15. Hook or me this time. Odd things happen to all of us on our way through life, without us noticing for a time that they have happened. Thus, let's take an instance. We suddenly discover that we have been deaf in one ear for we don't know how long, but say half an hour. Now, such an experience had come that night to me. When we last met, I was stealing across the island with one finger to my lip and my dagger at the ready. I had seen the crocodile pass by, without noticing anything particular about it. By and by, I remembered that it had not been ticking. At first, I thought this was eerie, but soon concluded that the clock had run down. Without giving a thought as to what might be feeling of this fellow creature, thus abruptly deprived of its closest companion, I began to consider how I could turn the catastrophe to my own use, and I decided to tick, so that wild beasts should believe that I was the crocodile and just let me pass by. And I ticked superbly, but with one unforeseen result. The crocodile was among those who heard the sound, and it followed me, though whether with the purpose of regaining what it had lost, or merely as a friend, under the belief that it was again ticking itself, will never be certainly known. But I reached the shore without mishap, and went straight on, my legs encountering the water, as if quite unaware that they had entered a new element. Thus many animals passed from land to water, but no other human of whom I know. And as I swam, I had but one thought again. Hook or me this time. I had ticked for so long that I now went on ticking without knowing that I was doing it. I scaled aboard the ship, and I was amazed to see the pirates were cowering from me, with Hook in their midst, as abject as if he had heard the crocodile. Oh, how clever of me, I thought at once, and I signed to the boys to not burst into applause. It was at this moment that Ed Tenmeet, the quartermaster, emerged from the forecastle and came along the deck. I struck true and deep. John had clapped his hands around the ill-fated pirate's mouth to stifle the drying moan. He fell forward, and 4 boys caught him to prevent a thud. I gave the signal, and the Charon was cast overboard. There was a splash, and then silence. 1. Slightly had begun to count. Every inch of me was on tiptoe, and I vanished into the cabin, for more than one pirate was screwing up his courage to look around. "It's gone, Captain," Smee said, wiping off his spectacles. "All still again." Still, slowly Hook let his head emerge from his ruff, and listened so intently that he could have caught the echo of the tick. There was not a sound, and he drew himself up firmly to his full height. "And here's to Johnny Plank," he cried brazenly, hating the boys more than ever, because they had seen him so unbend. He broke into his villainous ditty. Yo ho, the frisky Plank. You walks it too, it down it goes, and down you go to Davy Jones below. To terrorize the prisoners the more, though there was a certain loss of dignity, he danced along an imaginary plank, grimacing at them as he sang, and when he finished he cried, "Do you want a touch of the cat of 9 tails before you rock the plank?" And at that they fell to their knees. "No, no!" they cried so piteously that every pirate smiled. "Fetch the cat, Jukes." "It is in the cabin." "The cabin?" "I was in the cabin." The children were gazed at one another. "Aye, aye," said Jukes blithely, and he stole into the cabin. They followed him with their eyes. They scarcely knew that Hook had resumed his song, and his dogs were joining in with him. Yo ho, the scything cat. It's tales of 9, you know, and whether they wit upon your back. What was the last line will never be known. For all of a sudden the song was stayed by a dreadful screech that came from the cabin. It wailed through the ship and died away. Then was heard a crowing sound, which was well understood by the boys, but to the pirates was almost more eerie than a screech. "What was that?" cried Hook. "Two," said slightly solemnly. The Italian Secco hesitated for a moment, and then he swung into the cabin. He tottered out haggard. "What's the matter with Bill Jukes, you dog?" hissed Hook, towering over him. "What's the matter with him is he's dead, stabbed," replied Secco in a hollowed voice. "Bill Jukes dead!" startled the pirates. The cabin is as black as a pit," Secco called, almost gibbering. "But there is something terrible in there. The thing you heard crowing." The exultation of the boys, the luring looks from the pirates, both were seen by Hook. "Secco," he said in his most steely voice, "you go back and fetch me that doodle-doo." Secco, bravest of the braves, cowered before his captain, crying, "No, no." But Hook was purring to his claw. "Did you say you would go, Secco?" he said amusingly. And Secco went, first flinging his arms despairingly, but there was no more singing. All listened now, and again came the death screech, and again a crow. No one spoke except slightly. "3," he said. Hook rallied his dogs with a gesture. "'Tis death and odds fish," he thundered. "Who is to bring me that doodle-doo?" "Wait till Secco comes out," growled Starkey, and the others took up the cry. "I think I heard you volunteer, Starkey," said Hook, purring again. "No, by thunder!" Starkey cried. "My Hook thinks you did," said Hook, crossing to him. "I wonder if it would not be advisable, Starkey, to humor the Hook." "I'll swing before I go in there," replied Starkey doggedly, and again he had the support of the crew. "Is this mutiny?" asked Hook, more pleasantly than ever. "Starkey's ringleader?" "Captain Mercy," Starkey whimpered, all of a tremor now. "Shake hands, Starkey," said Hook, proffering his claw. Starkey looked around for help, but all had deserted him. As he backed up, Hook advanced, and now the red spark was in his eye. With a despairing scream, the pirate leapt onto the Long Tom and precipitated him into the sea. "4," said slightly. "And now," Hook said courteously, "did any other gentleman say mutiny?" Seizing a lantern and raising his claw with a menacing gesture, "I'll bring out that doodle-doo myself," he said, and sped into the cabin. 5. How much Slightly longed to say it. He welted his lips to be ready, but Hook came staggering back out without his lantern. "Something blew out the light," he said a little unsteadily. "Something?" echoed Mullins. "What of Secco?" demanded Noodler. "He is as dead as Jukes," said Hook shortly. His reluctance to return to the cabin impressed them all unfavorably, and the mutinous sounds broke forth again. All the pirates were superstitious, and Cookson cried, "They do say the surest sign of a ship accursed is when there is one on board more than it can be accounted for." "I've heard," muttered Mullins, "that he always boards the pirate craft last. Had he a tail, Captain?" "They say," said another, looking viciously at Hook, "that when he comes, it's in the likeness of the wickedest man aboard." "Had he a hook, Captain?" asked Cookson insolently, and one after another took up the cry, "The ship is doomed!" At this the children could not resist raising a cheer. Hook had well nigh forgotten his prisoners, but as he swung around on them, now his face lit up. "Lads," he cried to his crew, "now here's a notion. Open the cabin doors and drive them in. Let them fight the cock-a-doodle-doo, and if with their lives. If they kill him, we're so much the better. If he kills them, we're none the worse." For the last time his dogs admired Hook, and devotedly they did his bidding. The boys pretended to struggle, were pushed into the cabin, and the door was closed on them. "Now listen," cried Hook, and all listened. But not one dared to face the door. Yes, one, Wendy, who all this time had been bound to the mast. It was for neither a scream nor a crow that she was watching. It was for the reappearance of me. She had not long to wait. In the cabin I had found the thing of which I had gone into search, the key that would free the children from their manacles. And now they all stole forth, armed with such weapons that they could find. At first, signing them to hide, I snuck out and cut Wendy's bonds. And then nothing could have been easier for them to all fly off together. But one thing barred the way. My oath. Hook or me this time. So when I freed Wendy, I whispered for her to conceal herself with the others, and I took her place by the mast. Her cloak was around me, so that I could pass off as her. And I took a great breath and crowed. To the captains, it was a voice crying that all the boys laid slain in the cabin, and they were panic-stricken. Hook tried to harden them, but, like the dogs he had made them, they showed him their fangs, and he knew that if he took his eyes off of them, that they would leap at him. "Lads," he said, ready to cajole and strike if need be, but never quailing for an instant, "I've thought it out. There is a Jonah on board." "Aye," they snarled, "a man with a hook." "No, lads, no. It's the girl. Never was luck on a pirate ship with a woman on board. We'll right the ship when she's gone." Some of them remembered that this had always been a saying of Flint's. It was worth trying, they said undoubtfully. "Fling the girl overboard," cried Hook, and they made a rush at the figure in the cloak. "There's none that can save you now, missy," Mullins hissed cheerily. "There's one," replied the figure. "Who's that?" "Peter Pan the Avenger," came the terrible answer, and as I spoke I flung off the cloak. Then they all knew who 'twas had been their undoing in the cabin. And twice Hook essayed to speak, and twice he failed. In that frightful moment, I think his fierce heart broke. At last he cried, "Cleave him to the brisket!" but without conviction. "Down, boys, and aft down!" My voice rang out, and in another moment the clash of arms was resounding through the ship. Had the pirates kept together, it was certain that they would have won. But the onset came when they were still unstrung, and they ran hither and thither, striking wildly, each thinking himself the last survivor of the crew. Man to man, they were the stronger. But they fought on the defensive only, which enabled the boys to hunt in pairs and choose their quarry. Some of the miscreants leapt into the sea. Others hid in dark recesses, where they were found by Slightly, who did not fight, but ran about with a lantern, which he flashed in their faces. So they were now half blinded, and fell as easy prey to the reeking of swords of the other boys. There was little sound to be heard but the clang of weapons and the occasional screech and splash, and Slightly, monotonously counting 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I think all were gone when the group of savage boys surrounded Hook, who seemed to have had a charmed life, as he kept them at bay in that circle of fire. They had done for his dogs, but this man alone seemed to be a match for them all. Again and again they closed upon him, and again he hewed a clear space. He had lifted up one boy with his hook, and using him as a buckler, then another, who had just passed his sword through Mullins, sprang into the fray. "Put up your swords, boys," I cried. "This man is mine." Thus suddenly Hook found himself face to face with me. The others drew back and formed a ring around us. For long, we two enemies looked at one another, Hook shuddering slightly, and me with the strange smile upon my face. "So, Pan," said Hook at last, "this is all your doing." "Aye, James Hook, it is all my doing." "Proud and insolent youth," said Hook, "prepare to meet thy doom." "Dark and sinister man," I answered, "have at thee." And with no more words we fell to. For the space there was no advantage to either blade. I was a superb swordman, and parried in dazzling rapidity. Ever and anon I followed up with a feint and with a lunge, and I got past my foe's defenses. But my shorter reach stood me in ill stead, and I could not drive the steel home. Hook, scarcely my inferior in brilliancy, but not quite so nimble in wrist play, forced me back by the weight of his onset, and suddenly, to end with all of his favorite thrusts, I taught him long ago by barbecue at Rio. But, to his astonishment, he left this thrust turned aside again and again. Then he sought to close, and to give me his iron hook, which all this time had been pawing through the air. But I doubted under it, and I lunged fiercely, piercing him in the ribs. At the sight of his own blood, the sword fell from Hook's hand, and now he was at my mercy. "Now!" cried all the boys, and with a magnificent gesture, I invited my opponent to pick up his sword. Hook did so instantly, but with a tragic feeling that I was showing good form. He had thought it was some fiend fighting him, but darker suspicions assailed him now. "Pan, who and what art thou?" he cried huskily. "I'm youth. I'm joy. I am a little bird that has broken out of its egg." This, of course, was nonsense, but it was proof to the unhappy Hook that I did not know in the least who or what I am, which is the very pinnacle of good form. "To it again," he cried desperately. He fought now like a human frail, and each sweep of that terrible sword would have severed in twain any man or boy who obstructed it. but I fluttered around him as if the very wind, it drew me out of the danger zone. And again I darted in and pricked. Hook was now fighting without hope, and that passionate breast no longer asked for life, but for one born it craved, to see me show bad form before it was cold forever. Abandoning the fight, he rushed into the powder magazine and fired it. In 2 minutes, he cried, "The ship will be blown to pieces. Now, he thought, true form will show." But I issued from the powder magazine with the shell in my hands and calmly flung it overboard. What sort of form was Hook himself showing? A misguided man though he was, that in the end he was true to his traditions of his race. James Hook, thou not wholly an unheroic figure. Farewell, for we have come to his last moment. Seeing as I was slowly advancing upon him through the air with dagger poised, he sprang onto the bulwarks to cast himself into the sea. But what he did not know was that the crocodile was waiting for him. And remember, the clock had stopped. He had one last triumph, which I think we need not grudge him. As he stood on the bulwark, looking over his shoulder at me gliding through the air, he invited me, with a gesture, to use my foot, made me kick instead of stab. At last, Hook had got the boon for which he craved. "Bad form," he cried jeeringly, and went content to the crocodile. Thus perished James Hook. 17, slightly sang out, and he was not quite correct in his figures. 15 paid the penalty for their crimes that night, but 2 reached the shore. Starkey had to be captured by the natives, who made him nurse all of their papooses, a melancholy come down for the pirate. And Smee, who henceforth wandered about the earth in his spectacles, making a precarious living by saying he was the only man that Jas Hook had feared. Wendy, of course, had stood by, taking no part in the fight, though watching me with glistening eyes. But now that all was over, she became prominent again. She praised us all equally, and shuddered delightfully when Michael showed her the place where he had killed one. And when she took them to Hook's cabin, she pointed at the watch that was hanging on the nail. "It's 1:30. The lateness of the hour was almost the biggest of all. She got them all to bed in the pirate bunks pretty quickly, all but me, who strutted up and down on the deck until at last I fell asleep by the side of the Long Tom. I had one of my dreams that night, and I cried in my sleep for a long time. Wendy held me tightly.